Hello everyone, Stakuyi here.
And I'm Gabby.
And we are the hosts of History of Everything, a podcast which you can probably guess by the name is, well, it's about everything. Do you want to know why people thought potatoes were evil and would give you syphilis? Are you curious about all the stories of the terrible and stupid ways that people have kicked the bucket over the years? Do you want to hear tales about all of the different badasses of history and the lives that they had brought to life? Well, if so, then look no further. History of Everything is just the right podcast for you. It's available on Spotify, Pandora, and anywhere else that you get your podcast from. Join us for some fun and just see how weird and wacky history can be.
Are you interested in the parts of history that remain a mystery? Do you want to learn more about the historical myths and misconceptions used to prop up false belief today? I'm Nathaniel Lloyd. In my podcast, Historical Blindness, I delve into all of these topics, sharing puzzling tales from the past and examining hoaxes, conspiracy theories, and misremembered events that provide insight into modern politics and religion. New episodes every 2 weeks. Find Historical Blindness on most podcast players and platforms.
What follows may not be suitable for all audiences. Listener discretion is advised.
The world is full of stories. Stories of mysteries, of curiosities, of oddities. Join Kat and Jethro Gilligan Toth for the strange, the bizarre, the unexpected. But now it's your turn to lift the lid and tell us your favorite story as the Box of Oddities presents Freak Family Favorites.
Hi, my name is Keegan, and my favorite Box of Oddities story is all of them, but especially the weather on other planets.
So not long ago, I was with a group of people, some of my friends and some of their friends, so kind of like friends by association, and we're talking about things that we all love and find interesting and, you know, kind of geek talk. Mm-hmm. And someone brought up space stuff. I don't remember if it was talk about our solar system or a specific planet. And one guy spoke up and said, I don't know, I just don't find space interesting.
What?
And immediately I was like, okay, that's like saying that you don't like dogs to me. I don't get it. I don't understand it. I can't fathom not finding space interesting. So here we go. We're talking about the weather on the planets.
This is fascinating.
So let's start at Mercury. Mercury doesn't have much of an atmosphere, and it doesn't have weather like storms and clouds, wind, or rain, because the surface temperature can reach 800 degrees during the day, and that's because it's so close to the sun. It is the closest planet to the sun.
It's a dry heat, though.
Right, and that makes all the difference.
Yeah.
That's what I hear from everyone who's ever been to Arizona. Mm-hmm. So this is where we're gonna start at the closest planet, and we're gonna move our way out from the sun.
Okay.
The temperature on Mercury, though, surprising considering how close it is to the sun, can drop to negative 279 degrees at night because there's no atmosphere to trap in the heat.
Oh my God.
So it's there and then it's not. And you are subject to some very extreme conditions.
I had no idea it got that cold.
On Mercury. So Mercury, aptly named, but only during the day. Earth has seasons because its rotation axis is tilted by about 23 degrees, which changes the intensity of the sunlight and the length of day in each hemisphere throughout the year. However, Venus has been tilted so much that it's almost completely upside down, leaving it with a net tilt of less than 3 degrees from the sun. Also, its orbit is much more circular than the Earth. So the Earth kind of eggs its way around the sun.
Right.
And Venus is like tennis balling around the sun.
Okay.
Which prevents it from getting significantly hotter or cooler by moving closer or further away from the sun. So it's got a much more static weather system. And while you might expect things to cool down at night, especially since Venus rotates so slowly, its nights actually last about 2 Earth months. The thick atmosphere and sulfuric acid clouds act like a blanket, while the winds move heat around, keeping temperatures pretty even. It's like It's like one of those places where you go because you like that the weather's the same all the time. Though that constant temperature is around 800 degrees.
Doesn't it rain like sulfuric acid?
Yeah, well, it's
on
got
Venus?
those sulfuric acid clouds and a crushing atmosphere. It's about 90 times more pressure than Earth.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
P.S. Most of this information came from NASA.gov, the Caltech space blog, Wikipedia, and Universe Today. At our furthest point from Venus, we are about 162 million miles. But at our closest point, we're only about 24 million miles, which really goes to show what that rotation around the sun means. It's just such an extreme distance from furthest to closest. Now, when we're talking about Mars, our close point to Mars is about 33.9 million miles. Mars is interesting because it has a lot of similarities to Earth, such as polar ice caps, seasonal changes, and observable weather patterns. The Mars Orbiter camera data, which began in March of 1999 and covered about 2.5 Martian years, show that Martian weather tends to be more repeatable and more predictable than Earth's, though. And they think that's because Mars lacks oceans, so it doesn't have that additional layer that would provide interannual changes.
Did you know that there is iron in Mars's atmosphere? Iron in the atmosphere that contributes to the redness of the planet, or why it appears to be red.
Sounds worse than menthol cigarettes.
Yeah, it'd be tough on the breathing system. Also, I had read recently that in 2004, one of our probes detected snow at night. It was actually snowing.
Right. And that's the thing is it's estimated that Mars has not seen rain in millions of years. However, it does snow occasionally in the higher altitudes.
That blows my mind.
Mars is a cold planet with average temperatures at around minus 80 degrees. The real problem with Mars, though, is it's got a real radiation problem.
Sure.
BT dubs, because of its super thin atmosphere. Hey, Jupiter. Not weather related, but I found this super interesting and I'd never heard this before, but I have to share. If Jupiter, NASA estimates, had been about 80 times bigger, it would have been a star.
Really?
Yeah.
So it's a failed star.
It's a
Well, I mean, failed is kind
Yeah,
of
that sounds-
Perhaps it chose not to be a star, and that's fine.
It's a planet as a lifestyle choice.
Sure.
Jupiter is called a gas giant planet. Its atmosphere is made up mostly of hydrogen gas and helium gas, like the sun. The planet's covered in thick red, brown, yellow, and white clouds, and those clouds make it appear like it has stripes. In my brain, when I was young, Jupiter was like, you know how the Grand Canyon has the layers of, you can see like
Strata?
the strata.
Yeah.
And that's how I figured all of Jupiter looked. Was those layers of color and land. I don't know.
Okay.
Anyway, one of Jupiter's most famous features is the Great Red Spot, and that is a giant spinning storm which resembles a hurricane. At its widest point, it's about 3.5 times the diameter of Earth.
Good God.
The temperature of the clouds on Jupiter is about minus 145 Celsius. That's minus 134 degrees Fahrenheit. But near the center, it's much, much hotter. The core temperature might be about 24,000 degrees Celsius. That's 43,000 degrees Fahrenheit.
Wow.
That's hotter than the sun.
What? Wow. That doesn't even make any sense. Now, the big red storm, which sounds like the name of a college football team,
Sure.
has been raging for how long now? I remember Carl Sagan saying something about this in the original Cosmos.
I know it's thousands of years,
let's
but
check
I
it out.
don't know exactly.
Okay, according to Space.com, the massive storm larger than Earth itself was first spotted in 1830, and observations from the 1600s also revealed a giant spot on Jupiter's surface that may have been the same storm system. That suggests Jupiter's Great Red Spot, or the GRS, has been raging for at least centuries. They say, according to this article, that it could disappear within 20 years.
Really?
Yeah. They say in a decade or two, it may become the Great Red Circle. The center of the storm may dissipate by then.
Ah.
Interesting.
Yeah, so unlike rocky planets, which have clearly defined difference between atmosphere and surface, most gas giants don't have any surface. Their atmospheres simply become gradually denser toward the core, which means that you can't, quote unquote, land on any of these planets. So whether or not their weather is moot, we're never going to get to hang out on Jupiter. So does it matter?
Hey, never say never.
I think it's interesting. Saturn. Saturn's got an average temperature of minus 288 degrees Fahrenheit. Saturn is pretty cool, though there are some small differences as one travels from the equator to the poles. Much of Saturn's temperature variation is horizontal rather than vertical. This is because most of the planet's heat actually comes from its interior rather than from the sun.
Interesting.
It's too far from the sun to get its heat from there, so it gets its heat from its core, which I think is a great lesson about self-love.
It really is. Now, is that due to volcanic activity, do you think? Or it must be.
Uranus or Uranus. Unlike other gas giants, Uranus most likely boasts a rocky core rather than a gaseous one. Temperatures inside Uranus may reach 8,500 degrees, which sounds warm, but it's actually cooler than other planets. Uranus is tipped on its side, and it experiences seasons that last over 20 years. The temperatures between summer and winter don't differ greatly because the planet's so far from the sun. Again, it gets most of its heat from its interior. Near the cloud tops, the temperature of Uranus is negative 357 degrees Fahrenheit.
Now, I'd heard that there are rings around Uranus. Is that true?
Yes. But science now says that it's not healthy to bleach Uranus. Something about weakening the... Anyway.
The atmosphere. What are we, 8?
And finally, Neptune. Neptune has the wildest and strangest weather in what we know of the solar system. It has huge storms with extremely high winds. Neptune's winds can reach up to 1,500 miles per hour.
Holy crap.
That's the fastest planetary winds detected in our solar system. Its atmosphere has dark spots, which come and go, and bright cirrus-like clouds, which change rapidly. Neptune has an average temperature of negative 353 degrees Fahrenheit. So as we've mentioned, on Earth, sun drives our weather for the most part. You know, the oceans also play a part. But Neptune is actually so far away from the sun, it receives 1,000 times less sunlight than Earth does. How Neptune actually gets the energy for such intense weather is still a mystery to science.
I love science mysteries.
Me too.
That is fascinating.
And that's where I wanted to end it, on something that we still have to research, is because we don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know.
And I couldn't help but notice that you're snubbing Pluto, like NASA and everybody else. Like, oh no, we're going to take away your planetary status.
I debated on that long and hard.
Did you?
I did. But mostly I'm lazy. So I was like, hey, one less planet.
Yeah.
I'm in.
Spring, is that you? Warmer temps mean new Allbirds styles. Meet the new Superlight collection, the lightest ever shoes from Allbirds, now in fresh colors. These must-have travel shoes have a lighter-than-air feel and barely-there fit that made them the most packable shoes ever. Plus, they're comfy right out of the box. That means more comfort and less baggage. Experience how Allbirds is redefining comfort. Visit allbirds.com and use code SUPER24 for a free pair of socks with a purchase of $48 or more. That's ALLBIRDS.com, code SUPER24.
When Johann Rall received the letter on Christmas Day 1776, he put it away to read later. Maybe he thought it was a season's greeting and wanted to save it for the fireside. But what it actually was a warning, delivered to the Hessian colonel, letting him know that General George Washington was crossing the Delaware and would soon attack his forces. The next day, when Rall lost the Battle of Trenton and died from 2 colonial Boxing Day musket balls, the letter was found, unopened, in his vest pocket. As someone with 15,000 unread emails in his inbox, I feel like there's a lesson there. Oh well, this is The Constant, a history of getting things wrong. I'm Mark Chrysler. Every episode, we look at the bad ideas, mistakes, and accidents that misshaped our world. Find us at constantpodcast.com or wherever you get your podcasts.
The Box of Oddities with Kat and Jethro Gilligan Toth.
Hello, my name is Aaron, and my favorite Box of Oddities story is the USS Indianapolis.
I got a horror story for you.
Ooh.
And it is horrific. The best horror stories are the ones that are true.
Yeah.
And this is very true. It was Monday, July 30th, 1945. It was a very bad day for the crew of the USS Indianapolis. It was a battleship in the South Pacific during World War II. It had just completed a very important mission of delivering components of the very first working atomic bomb to a naval base on a Pacific island called Tinian. This was just 1 week before the atomic bomb leveled Hiroshima. It had left Guam on July 29th.
Guam. That's what I was trying to think of the other day. Guam. Oh, thank you. Oh my goodness.
I have no idea what you're talking about.
Oh, I wasn't talking to you.
Oh, okay.
I was just trying to come up with Guam.
So Guam, the destination of the Indianapolis was to join the USS Idaho in the Philippines in preparation for the Japanese invasion. The seas were kicking up 5 to 6 foot waves, and the battleship was traveling at about 17 knots regardless. That's pretty fast, I guess.
Okay.
It had been a quiet day at sea, and as the sundown approached, the crew was relatively chill. They understood that a potentially bloody invasion was at hand, but they were doing their best to relax.
Okay.
Some of them were reading, some were playing cards. As the evening progressed, most of the crew had settled down for the night. Just after midnight, a Japanese torpedo tore through the Indianapolis on the starboard bow. This was a huge issue because that's where the ship stored their fuel. 3,500 gallons of oil spilled into the water and immediately caught on fire.
Oof.
Flames shot in the air over 100 feet. As the crew was frantically dealing with this, a second torpedo struck midship, causing the fuel tanks and powder magazines to explode. It was pretty bad. This created a chain reaction that ultimately ripped the Indianapolis in two. And because it was traveling at a pretty good rate, it quickly filled with water. In fact, in just seconds, it was filled with water. It only took 12 minutes for this entire battleship to completely sink.
Oof.
There were 1,196 crew members on board the battleship. 900 of them miraculously survived all the explosions and were able to escape into the water alive. But of course, with 3,500 gallons of oil on fire.
Yuck. Oh, I hate that idea.
It seemed to them like the entire Pacific was ablaze. One survivor, Seaman First Class Lyle Umenhofer, said, quote, "When I looked down at myself, I noticed I was covered in this oil. And the first instinct is to get away from it, because if it catches on fire, you're really in trouble. The first impulse is to swim away. So I swam away, and this was a little after midnight when it happened. And then by probably 5 or 6 o'clock in the morning, I was still swimming. I didn't have anything. I didn't have a life jacket, so I was swimming from midnight to 5:30 in the morning. And as the sun came up on the morning of July 30th, the ship, of course, completely gone, and all that could be seen were pieces of wreckage floating in the water, as well as dozens and dozens of corpses. Many of the survivors were dealing with severe burns. Some had severed limbs.
Excuse me? Hi, I was told this was a ghost story, and instead it's just really depressing.
No, I said it was a horror story.
Oh.
There's a difference.
Oh, I was not prepared for the right thing. Ah, jeez.
There were not enough life rafts, so many of the wounded sailors were just floating in the ocean. Because it happened so fast, a vast majority of the crew didn't have time to put on life vests. They resorted to taking the life vests off their dead crew members that were floating nearby.
Oh.
They tried to organize by forming several small groups and one large group of about 300 sailors, and they all huddled together in these groups in the water, most of them with no life vests, some of them in rafts, waiting for assistance. The men, of course, were exhausted, and then thirst began to set in. But then, as horrific as that is, the real horror struck. Because of the huge explosions, the noise, the sinking of the ship, the spilled oil, and of course all of the blood in the water, sharks began to circle. And not just a few, but over 100. And not just any sharks. These were the aggressive oceanic white tip sharks. The first targets of the sharks were the floating corpses, and they made very quick work of them. While the corpses were being devoured, that of course attracted more sharks. And then they began to target the sailors, struggling to survive on the surface of the Pacific.
You would think maybe the oil would keep them from being eaten.
Yeah, apparently it didn't make a difference. Survivors tell a horrifying tale of men scattered over an area of about 100 square meters, being attacked by over 100 sharks, relentlessly. The sailors knew that the sharks were attracted to the blood, so if they were nearby somebody that was bleeding, or if they were near a corpse, they would attempt to swim away to try to prevent being attacked. One survivor, Eugene Morgan, in an interview with History, said, quote, "All the time the sharks never let up. We had a cargo net that had styrofoam things attached to it to keep it afloat. There were about 15 sailors on this, and suddenly 10 sharks hit it, and there was nothing left. This went on and on and on."
Oh, God. I can't imagine how traumatic that would be. As a survivor, to see that happening
to your friends
over and over again.
Most of the sailors, of course, were frozen with fear, and they were suffering from thirst, and many of them were wounded, and there was no food because when they started to open up food, their rations, which consisted of Spam, the smell attracted more sharks, so they had to throw their rations away. Signalman Third Class Paul McGinnis said in that same History interview, quote, "While I was completely coherent, this was my thought. Keep struggling and stay alive. It was very miserable because the sun burning the skin, one could not escape it. It was like having your head in a hole in the middle of a mirror with all of the sunlight being reflected and burning your face so hard. It was miserable like hell. You could not wait for the sun to go down. When the sun did go down, it was a relief. Then
I wish this was Ghosts.
Then it would get cold and you would start to shiver and you couldn't wait for the sun to come back up again. Hours turned into days and still no sight of rescue vessels. Again, remember, many of these guys, wounded, burned, sunburned, trying to avoid being eaten by over 100 sharks. They have no life vests. They're swimming on their own. There was nothing to hang on to in many cases. The heat and the thirst caused many to start to hallucinate. And as you can imagine, they were losing hope.
Yeah.
Some, not being able to stand the thirst anymore, began to drink the seawater, and this caused salt poisoning, and the sailors soon started to descend into madness. Some started to attack their fellow crewmen. They would come at them with swollen lips and tongues and foaming mouths. At times, they were an even greater threat to the crew members than the sharks were that were circling just below them.
How long is this going on for?
It went on for 4 days. The madness of some of the men accelerated to the point where they were attacking each other with knives and killing each other. And because some drank so much seawater and they were hallucinating, a man named Granville Crane, he was a machinist's mate, said they started seeing things. They'd say things like, "The Indy is down below, and they're giving out fresh water and food in the galley." And they would swim down and a shark would eat them. You had to watch sharks eating your comrades. The nightmare, as I mentioned, lasted 4 days. And there was no reason for it to last this long because signal distresses had gone out. 3 different radio stations of the U.S. Navy had received news of the disaster as it happened, but none of them bothered to transmit it to their superiors.
No, what?
The commander of Station Number 1 was drunk. Another commander at a different station had ordered his men to not disturb him, and they didn't. The third commander thought it was a Japanese hoax and ignored it. It was 11 o'clock in the morning on Friday, 4 days later. that a Navy patrol plane spotted the survivors and radioed for assistance. Within hours, a seaplane arrived, and they dropped rafts and survival kits to the sailors. And shortly after midnight, they were finally pulled from the Pacific by the USS Doyle. Out of the 1,156 crew members, only 317 managed to survive. Many died of thirst, fatigue, insanity. It's been estimated, though, that at least 150 of them were killed by sharks. It's been called the worst shark attack of all time. It's also the most shocking maritime disaster in the history of the U.S. Navy. It was a very bad day. Actually, 4 very, very bad days. My source information, earthlymissionhistory.com and CBS News. Yeah.
I hated that.
I'm sure you did.
Yeah.
Just be grateful that no matter how bad your day gets, you're not missing an arm, partially burned, hallucinating with no life jacket, and avoiding sharks.
And as always, thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
Until then, keep flying that freak flag.
And fly it proudly, you beautiful freak.
And so, would you like to host your own segment and share your favorite Box of Oddities story? Just record on your smartphone who you are, where you're from, what your favorite story is, and why, and anything else you'd like to share. Then email it to curator@theboxofoddities.com. Copyright 2024, all rights reserved.